Hello, Year 6. Welcome to Tuesday's story time. So we are on Chapter 4, and I read Part 1 of Chapter 4 yesterday. I'm going to read the remainder of Chapter 4 today for you. Children in the story have just arrived at Slimwood's Sky Circus, and I believe they're about to go in. We should get the cabbie to wait, he mumbled, but it was too late. The hansom had already turned around and was trundling off up the road through the thick fog. Now, how are we going to get home? He complained. Robert's right, Tolly said, watching the steam hansom vanish into the night. It's too dangerous to walk back in this weather. Malkin looked at them crossly. Why didn't you say anything sooner? I didn't think, said Robert. It was Lily's plan, and I assumed. Never assume anything, the fox said snootily. Assumptions are always a mistake. Look at Lily. Not one of life's planners, and yet she assumes everything will turn out rosy because... Quiet, Lily snapped. But the truth was, Malkin was right. She hadn't thought her plan through, and already it was going wrong. She had expected at least a few hansoms and steam wagons belonging to the earlier crowds to be parked here, and she had hoped that one of them might offer them a lift home later. But there was no chance of that. The place was deserted. Beside her, Robert and Tolly shrunk into their coats, and even Malkin was on high alert, his hackles raised. She took a great gulp of air to try and calm herself, but her fear still fizzed and fizzled in her. She couldn't let her sudden sense of dread distract her from her earlier excitement over the chance to find out more about Mamma's work. Someone at the Sky Circus, maybe Angelique, maybe another act, had sent Mamma's notebook, and they must be able to tell her more about it. She took out her pocket watch and checked the time. It's already 7:29. We'd best hurry if we want to catch the start of the show. She pushed open the gate and stepped into the foggy field beyond. Wait for me, Malkin cried, rushing behind her with his tail down. Tolly glanced at Robert. Come on, he said apprehensively, and together they both followed the others through the gap. A narrow path lined with flickering candles in glass jam jars led them down into the dell they'd seen earlier from the tower, where the high circular wooden fence of whitewashed slats stood, plastered with bold posters of circus folk. Behind it was the striped canvas Big Top, and behind that was the gigantic red and white hot air balloon, big as a harvest moon and twice as bright. Lily was relieved to see through the mist that a last handful of villagers were standing beside the ticket booth and a gated entranceway in the fence, paying for their tickets. She and the others joined the line behind them. When they'd finished, they pushed through the high spike-tipped iron gates one by one and disappeared beyond the fence. Then Lily found herself at the front of the line. Inside the kiosk was a man in clown makeup and a frilly collar. His ghostly face was white with powder. A black makeup snake squiggled round one eye, and a painted teardrop fell from the other, making him look, positively frightening. Lily smiled at him and got a grimace in return, and then he reached up and began pulling a metal grill down over the window. Sales are closing, he explained, through the bars. The show's about to start. If you want to join the crowd, you'll have to be quick smart. We've a VIP ticket, a personal invite. Lily placed their ticket on the counter in front of him. The clown examined it. So you do. Well, this looks fine. And since you're in line, you're most assuredly on time. He ripped the ticket into tiny pieces and giggled, throwing them over his head like confetti. Then, leaping out of a side door of the booth, he tipped his triangular white hat at them and bowed so low that the red pom-pom on the front of his polka-dot clown suit squashed together about his tummy. Coming up, he was all smiles, which was disconcerting, as there was already a sharply outlined grin painted on his lips. Come along, good fellows, follow me. Outside the Big Top, there's nothing to see. He ushered them through the iron gates, locking them behind him, and was only slightly taken aback when Malkin slipped through the bars and joined the rear of the line. The mist had yet to penetrate beyond the fence, A red carpet edged with more glass jar lanterns and furry as a tongue, had been unfurled across the grass and between the taut guy ropes. It ended at a wide-mouthed archway hung with lanterns, where the last few stragglers they had just seen were making their way into the big top. A jingle of accordion, drum, and fiddle music accompanied them, mixed with a chatter of expectant voices that drifted from the tent. "My name's Joey the Clown," Joey said. "I smile more than most, but sometimes I get down." He pointed to a painted teardrop on his cheek and gave a leering approximation of a sad face. Robert thought Joey very odd indeed. The clown's sing-song jabbering was not putting him any more at ease. It had an awkward, nervous quality to it, beneath the light, jokey tone. He wondered if everything the clown said was always in rhyme. Surely that would drive him crazy, if he wasn't so already. As they neared the canvas entrance, a mechanical man lumbered into view, his limbs creaking like the screech of unoiled brakes. He was about 8 feet tall, taller than any human, and bigger and wider too. The mechanical man turned his head and stared at them as they passed, and his neck joints made a horrible crunching sound. His eyes were as big and dead and empty as the round headlamps on a steam wagon, while his mouth ran straight across his face in a flat expression that was neither a smile nor a frown. His bulky body looked like it was made from discarded parts of heavy machinery, and his arms clanged as he folded them across his chest. Robert shivered. They were as thick and square as brick pillars, with hands that looked big enough to crush a skull. Lucky that mechanicals were programmed not to hurt humans. "That's the Lunk," said Joey. "He stands guard. Guards the stand. He's our mechanical strongman. He creaks the whole time because he never uses an oil can." Lily and Tolly stared worriedly at the Lunk, but they didn't have the opportunity to consider them mechanical anymore, for Joey was guiding them down a short canvas tunnel into the big top, where the smoky aroma of roasting chestnuts and burned candy floss mixed with a smell of canvas, wood shavings, and stale sweat. They passed a gaily painted cart in the entranceway, behind which stood a second clown, whose face looked entirely different from Joey's. White rings surrounded his eyes, red lipstick splurged around his mouth, and his hair, which stuck out at every angle from beneath a battered bowler hat, was dyed a bright orange colour that reminded Lily of a raw carrot. To top it off, he wore a suit of loud, mismatching checks draped over his squat body like an oversized tablecloth. It looked like it had been assembled from the remains of an explosion in a tartan factory. "Roll up, step right this way," he called out, waving at the jars of sweets laid out on the counter of his cart. "Tracks and sneets, geinwums, Shem lervets, stickerish licks, droccolate chops, fandycloss, and choast restnuts. You too can taste these tronderous wheats." Robert didn't know what any of those were, but they sounded quite disgusting. "This is Augie," Joey said. "He's a bit of a spoonerist, gets his words all mixed up, but if you listen carefully, you'll get the gist." We don't have money," Lily told the clowns. "That's perfectly fine." Augie reached out one big gloved hand, plucked a small red and white striped heart-shaped box from beneath the wagon's counter, and passed it to Lily. "Another gift for you." "Oh, I forgot to say," Joey added, "compliments of the house, since it's your birthday." "Oh, thank you." Lily's grin couldn't quite hide the confusion she felt inside. She took the box of chocolates and handed them to Robert. She didn't recall telling the clown it was her birthday, but somehow they seemed to know. Could they be the ones who'd sent the first present? Joey led them past rows of tiered wooden benches, which were arranged 5 deep around the tent and filled with everyone from the village who hadn't been invited to Papa's party. Lily recognized various local faces among them. The schoolmistress, out with the butcher's boy from the high street, was trying to ignore a gaggle of her pupils sitting directly behind her. The baker and his wife and their 2 children were sharing a box of popcorn, the littlest one dropping half of his on the floor. Beside them, the old man, whose job it was to light and snuff the 5 street lamps around the village green, was busily puffing on his pipe. Other notable local faces filled the rest of the stands, people who nodded to Lily and Robert, but then immediately turned to their neighbours to gossip about them when they'd passed. Lily imagined they were probably wondering why she wasn't at Papa's party, scoffing platefuls of food. Mrs. Rust had been out purchasing in the local shops all week. Here we are. Joey stopped at a handful of empty wooden chairs beside the central sawdust ring that had been cordoned off by a red ribbon. The VIP area, he said, pulling his left eye wide with one finger and rolling the eyeball about. Then he blinked. Sorry. Feeling a bit sick. Bit of a tick-tock. Ah. Wondering what it is that makes you tick? Lily stiffened. He'd said exactly the words from the card that had rhymed too. She was starting to suspect he'd written it, and she was beginning to have terrible misgivings about this whole adventure. But Joey was already whisking the ribbon from the aisle and ushering them into their seats. While they were taking off their coats, he pointed out the red velvet curtains on the far side of the ring. In the shadows stood the 4-piece band, 3 men and a woman dressed in patchwork suits, who were playing their jangle-sharp warm-up tune on their instruments as the last of the audience settled in for the show. This spot might not look like much to you, Joey explained, but rest assured it has the best view. Happy birthday, Lily, on our behalf, and look for me in the very first half. With that, he saluted and was gone. Lily looked anxiously around, uncertainly trying to determine what they'd let themselves in for. One thing the clown had said was true. They were in the best seats in the house. She could see everything from where she sat. A quartet of poles around the ring held up the roof. From them radiated swathes of canvas hung with black, white, and yellow bunting. Smaller side poles around the edges were hung with individual oil lamps. Gradually, the babble of the crowd died away as the 2 clowns, Joey and Augie, moved among them, laboriously and with much slapstick, snuffing out each of the lamps. Finally, there was only one flame left. It guttered and died, and the entire tent was plunged into darkness. The band stopped playing their jittery tune, and Lily found she was holding her breath. She wondered if the next hour would give her the answer she hoped for, or if coming here had the makings of a grave mistake. Thank you for joining me today. Tomorrow we will continue with Chapter 5.